White mom disowns black baby, then faints, seeing her face on every newsstand. The delivery room was silent, except for the faint beep of machines and the steady breath of nurses moving in and out like ghosts. Jane Whitmore lay still on the hospital bed, her body trembling, drenched in a cold sweat. Her blonde hair clung to her forehead as the doctor held up the newborn and announced, "It's a girl." Jane didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just stared. Wrapped in a soft white blanket, the baby was beautiful. Her skin was a warm, rich brown, her curls already thick and dark, and her tiny eyes, just opened, held a wisdom that seemed to cut straight through Jane. The silence stretched. The nurse stepped forward, gently lifting the baby toward her mother. "Would you like to hold her?" Jane recoiled like she'd been slapped. "No, just take her." "I can't." There was a pause. The nurse blinked, clearly startled. Then she nodded silently and backed away. From the far side of the room, Gregory Whitmore, Jane's husband, stood frozen. His skin went pale, and the corners of his mouth twitched, as if 1,000 thoughts were colliding at once and none could break through. He spoke at last. "What the hell is this, Jane?" Jane couldn't meet his eyes. Her gaze was locked on the baby, who now lay peacefully in the nurse's arms, oblivious to the chaos her presence had stirred. "She's not yours," Jane said quietly. "No kidding," Gregory hissed, stepping forward. "You cheated on me? With who?" "Jesus, Jane, what were you thinking?" Jane flinched, not at the words, at the look in his eyes. A mix of rage, betrayal, and something deeper, something colder, disgust. "She's black," he said, and the word hung in the air like smoke. Jane closed her eyes. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. Gregory shook his head, backing away. "I can't raise her, Jane. I won't." "We have a reputation in this town, at church, at my job." "You've destroyed everything." The nurse hovered in the corner, cradling the infant like a fragile secret no one wanted to speak aloud. The doctor cleared his throat and gently excused himself. The room was full of people, yet no one said what everyone knew. This wasn't just infidelity. This was scandal. This was shame. This was a baby who didn't fit. The social worker came in later that afternoon. Her name was Teresa. She had soft eyes and a firm voice, and she spoke to Jane like she wasn't the worst person in the world. "You have options," she said gently, placing a folder on the small table. "Open adoption. Closed adoption. State foster care. Take your time. No decision has to be made today." But Jane already knew what Gregory expected. What her parents would say, what the neighbors would whisper, what her 2 other children, Haley and Max, would hear in the school hallways if she brought this child home. She had wanted to be brave. She had wanted to fight. But when the nurse returned, asking again if she wanted to hold her daughter, Jane turned her face to the wall. 2 days later, Jane signed the papers. She didn't name the baby. She didn't kiss her goodbye. She simply turned her face away, heart clenched like a fist inside her chest, and whispered the same line she would repeat to herself for the next 18 years. "It's for the best." Back home, everything was quiet. Gregory didn't speak to her for days, but he didn't leave either. They shared the same house, the same bed, but a chasm opened between them that never quite closed. Haley and Max, too young to understand the weight in their mother's eyes, continued their lives as if nothing had happened. They were told Jane had a health issue, that the baby didn't survive. No one questioned it. No one brought it up again, except Jane. In her mind, every night, the memories of those 2 days, the sound of the baby's cry, the sight of her curled fists, the moment Jane signed her name and became something she didn't recognize, looped endlessly like a punishment with no end. She tried to move forward. Threw herself into motherhood with Haley and Max. Took up painting again. Started volunteering at the local women's shelter. But the silence was louder than ever. Years passed. Jane aged. Gregory climbed the corporate ladder. Haley went off to college. Max got a football scholarship. On the outside, the Whitmores were the picture of suburban perfection. On the inside, Jane was unraveling. She never told anyone the truth. Not even her therapist. The weight was too great. Then, one ordinary Thursday afternoon, everything shattered. Jane was at the grocery store. The sun was bright outside. She had just placed a carton of oat milk in her basket and turned toward the magazine rack at the checkout when her breath caught in her throat. There, on the cover of Time magazine, was a face she hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades, but one she would never forget. A young woman. Tall, poised, elegant, her skin radiant. Her eyes fierce. Above her, bold letters read, "Meet Noelle Harmon, the lens behind a global movement." Jane's knees buckled. The magazine slipped from her fingers. She tried to steady herself on the cart, but everything blurred. The overhead lights swam. The tiled floor came rushing up. And then, darkness. She woke up in a hospital bed, an IV in her arm. A nurse leaning over her. "Mrs. Whitmore." "You fainted in the checkout line. How are you feeling?" Jane blinked, disoriented. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then the memory hit her, the face, the name. Noelle, her daughter, the baby she had given away. Now staring back at her from every newsstand in America. And that's when she realized, the past never stays buried. It finds you. And sometimes it shows up wearing a camera around its neck, changing the world while you're still trying to forget you once refused to hold it. She clutched the edge of the blanket, her pulse racing, a single question pounding in her mind like a drum. Does she know? And if she does, what will she do next? Jane sat upright in the hospital bed, gripping the magazine that a nurse had placed on the tray table next to her. Her hands shook. The glossy paper crinkled under her fingers as she stared at the image again, trying to process the impossible. Noelle Harmon. The name felt like an echo of something that should never have had a voice. Her daughter. Her daughter. The one she had never held, never named, never looked at for more than a moment, before turning away. Now grown, now radiant, now everywhere. The nurse had said she fainted at the checkout line. She must have looked ridiculous, collapsing like some elderly woman in front of the freezer aisle. But it wasn't dizziness. It wasn't dehydration. It was guilt. Raw, jagged, all-consuming guilt. And now that it had found her again, it refused to let go. When Gregory arrived at the hospital, he looked tired, irritated, like he had just come from a board meeting. He walked into the room with his arms crossed, eyes immediately narrowing as he saw the magazine on her lap. "What is that?" he asked. Jane didn't answer right away. She turned the magazine so he could see it clearly. Gregory stepped closer, his gaze falling on the photo. He squinted, then frowned. "Who is this?" "That," Jane said quietly, "is our daughter." He froze. "Excuse me?" "The baby," she whispered, voice cracking. "The one we gave up. That's her." "Noelle." Gregory let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "No, that's not possible. She's 18 now." "Maybe 19. The timing fits. Look at her face, Greg." "Look at her eyes. She has mine." Gregory glanced down again, slower this time. He studied the picture. His lips parted slightly. She's successful. She's a world-famous photographer, Jane said, her voice barely above a whisper. And she was in foster care before being adopted. It says it all in the article. Gregory sat heavily in the visitor chair. He ran both hands over his face. I thought she was placed directly into adoption. That's what they told us, Jane replied. But apparently, that didn't happen. The silence thickened. Gregory leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes for a moment. So, what do you want to do? I don't know, Jane admitted. But I can't pretend I didn't see her. I can't unknow this. Gregory didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low. Measured. You realize what this could mean, right? If the press connects her back to us, if someone digs into her birth records, it could explode. Your name. My name. The kids. Our friends. Our church. Jane stared at him. Is that what you care about right now? Reputation. It's not just that, he said defensively. It's everything. Our entire life is built on what we left behind. Jane looked down at the photograph. Noelle's eyes were calm, confident, as if daring the world to challenge her. I don't care about that anymore, she whispered. I just want to know who she became. I want to know if she's happy. When they were discharged later that evening, Jane kept the magazine clutched in her hands like it might disappear if she let go. In the car, Gregory drove in silence. Jane scrolled through her phone, typing Noelle's name into the search bar. Instant results exploded across her screen. New York Times profile. TED Talk feature. Times 30 under 30. Instagram, verified. Over 2 million followers. Jane clicked through, her breath catching in her throat with each photo. Noelle in Rwanda, photographing children in a refugee camp. Noelle in Paris at an art gala, wearing a gold gown and a crown of curls. Noelle with her adoptive parents, Betty and Charles Harmon, cutting a ribbon at a youth center opening in Chicago. They looked like a real family. They were a real family, and Jane was the ghost outside the window, looking in. Later that night, she sat at her kitchen table long after Gregory had gone to bed. She opened a new document on her laptop and began typing a letter. Dear Noelle, you don't know me, but I know you. I saw you on the cover of Time magazine today, and the world fell out from under me. I was your birth mother. I made a decision 19 years ago that I have regretted every day since. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a reply. But if you are open to it, I would like to tell you what happened. Not to make excuses, but to offer truth, if you're willing. Sincerely, Jane Whitmore. She stared at the words for a long time. Then she closed the laptop. She wasn't ready. The next morning, a text came from Haley. Mom, I saw something online. Is it true? Jane froze. Her fingers hovered over the phone. Is what true? She replied. About the woman on the cover of Time. People are saying she was adopted. That she's from Portland. That her real mother gave her up. How would Haley know that? Who was talking? Jane's heart pounded. She typed slowly. We should talk tonight. When Haley showed up that evening, her face was tense. She stepped into the kitchen and got straight to the point. You gave up a baby? Jane swallowed. Yes. Because she was black. Yes. But it's more complicated than that. Haley's jaw clenched. That's disgusting. I know. No, you don't. You don't get to say I know and expect it to go away. Jane nodded. You're right. Haley folded her arms. I have a sister, and you lied about it my whole life. Jane's voice cracked. I was ashamed. And scared. And wrong. Haley didn't speak for a while. Then, softly, she asked, "Does she know?" "I don't think so." "Not yet." Haley shook her head. "You need to tell her." Jane nodded again. "I know." Outside, rain had begun to fall. Inside, for the first time in 19 years, something began to break. Not apart, but open. And Jane wasn't sure if it would bring redemption or ruin. She only knew one thing. She couldn't turn away this time. Jane parked her car 3 blocks away from the Portland Museum of Art. The rain had just stopped, leaving the streets slick and glistening under the streetlights. She didn't know what she was doing here. She had no plan, no invitation, and no idea what she would say if she came face to face with Noelle. But she knew she couldn't stay home. Not tonight. Not after everything that had come pouring back into her life. Noelle's exhibition, Through Our Eyes, was opening that evening. Jane had seen the posts online, Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn. She followed them silently, without liking, without commenting, but clinging to every image like it was oxygen. As she approached the museum entrance, she caught glimpses of guests through the tall glass walls, elegant, stylish people holding flutes of champagne and nodding thoughtfully at massive framed photographs. There were posters everywhere featuring Noelle's face. Her eyes, large and commanding, stared out from every corner like a challenge Jane was terrified to answer. She stood across the street, hands shoved deep in the pockets of her coat, heart hammering, and then, through the museum doors, Noelle appeared. Tall, striking. She wore a fitted black jumpsuit and deep red lipstick. Her hair was up in a crown of curls, and a press badge was clipped to the edge of her pocket. She looked confident and at ease as she moved through the crowd, laughing with guests, posing for photos. Jane's knees almost buckled. She leaned against the street lamp, staring. She had been terrified that Noelle might look unhappy, lost. Instead, her daughter looked like she belonged, right here, in this world of light and admiration and success. Jane took a step back, about to turn around, when a familiar voice rang out beside her. "You came!" Startled, she spun around. Haley stood there, arms folded, eyes narrowed. "I figured you'd try to sneak around instead of just walking in like a normal person." Jane blinked. "What are you doing here?" "I called in a favor. Got an invite." "Figured I'd see for myself. You shouldn't be here. If Noelle sees us..." "If she sees us, then it's real, isn't it?" Haley shot back. "You can't hide from her forever, Mom." Jane looked down, ashamed. "I don't want to cause a scene. This is her night." "She's not a child anymore," Haley said, softer this time. "She doesn't need you to protect her from a truth she's already chasing." There was a pause between them, heavy with all the things they hadn't said. "I wrote her a letter," Jane said quietly, "but I couldn't send it. I kept thinking, maybe she's better off not knowing." Haley exhaled. "Better off not knowing that her mother was watching from across the street like some criminal?" Jane swallowed. "I thought I was doing the right thing. Back then." "You were doing what was easy," Haley said. No accusation in her voice now, just resignation. "And now it's hard." Jane nodded, her eyes burning. Across the street, a photographer snapped Noelle's picture as she stood next to a large portrait. A young black girl sitting alone on a swing, staring straight into the lens. "She's powerful," Jane murmured. "She's everything I didn't have the courage to be." Haley tilted her head. "Maybe. But you're here now. And that counts for something." At that moment, a woman stepped outside the museum, scanning the crowd. It was Noelle's adoptive mother, Betty Harmon. Jane recognized her from the photographs, slightly older now, with soft grey curls and eyes that radiated warmth. She walked toward Jane and Haley with quiet confidence. "Are you Jane?" she asked gently. Jane froze. "Yes. How did you—" "I saw you through the glass," Betty said. "Noelle saw you too." Jane's stomach dropped. Betty smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "She asked me to come invite you in, if you're willing." Jane couldn't move. "She knows who I am." "She knows enough," Betty replied. "And she has questions." Haley nudged her mother forward, gently. "This is it, Mom." Inside, the air was warm and humming with voices and music. Jane's steps felt slow and uncertain as she walked behind Betty. Guests parted like water as they made their way through the gallery. Some looked curious. Others didn't notice her at all. She was invisible to most of them, and yet she felt like a spotlight followed her with every breath. Then she saw her again. Noelle, standing beside a series of portraits, children, mothers, fathers, all caught in raw, honest moments. Jane saw one that nearly made her collapse, a photo of a baby bassinet in a hospital room alone, sunlight casting long shadows across the floor. It wasn't a portrait. It was a memory. Noelle stood beside it, watching Jane as she approached. They locked eyes. Time didn't stop. It twisted, bent around them like heat on pavement. "Hi," Jane managed, her voice barely audible. Noelle didn't smile. She didn't move, but she didn't turn away either. "You were watching me," she said. Jane nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "For how long?" "Since the article," Jane whispered. "The magazine. I saw you. I needed to see you, to know you're okay." Noelle tilted her head slightly, studying her face. "You never reached out." "I didn't know how," Jane said. "I didn't think I had the right." "You didn't," Noelle said bluntly. Jane flinched. "I still don't know what I want," Noelle added, "or what this is, but I'm tired of carrying questions. So if you're here to be honest, then talk." Jane's eyes filled with tears. "Your name was Claire," she said softly. "For a moment." "Before I let them change it, I named you after my grandmother. You had so much hair even then. And you looked right at me, like you knew everything already." Noelle said nothing, but her eyes glistened. "I was afraid," Jane continued. "Afraid of what people would think, afraid of my husband, afraid of losing everything. So I gave up the one thing I never stopped wanting." She reached into her coat and pulled out an envelope. Inside was the letter, the one she couldn't send. Noelle hesitated, then took it. "I'll read it later," she said. Jane nodded. Noelle's voice softened. "I don't know if I can forgive you." "I'm not asking for that," Jane said. "Only the chance to try." From behind them, a camera clicked. Then another. Noelle glanced at the photographer and turned back. "I think we're being watched," she murmured. Jane gave a faint smile. "Feels like karma." Noelle didn't laugh, but her expression shifted. "Something subtle. Not quite forgiveness, but not rejection either." "Just the beginning of something, maybe." "I'm giving a talk tomorrow," Noelle said. "At the youth center. Come if you want, but not as my mother." "Just as someone who's finally ready to listen." Jane nodded. "I'll be there." As Noelle turned away, Jane looked down at the envelope in her daughter's hand. For the first time, she didn't feel like a ghost outside the window. She felt like a woman stepping through the door, and this time, she wasn't turning back. The next morning, the rain returned to Portland like a slow confession. Jane sat alone at her kitchen table, staring at the cooling cup of tea in front of her. She hadn't slept much, Her mind was tangled in the gallery, in Noelle's voice, in that split second of hesitation before she took the letter. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. For Jane, that sliver of space in between was a lifeline. Doug entered the kitchen quietly, the way he always did when something weighed heavy between them. He poured himself coffee, didn't sit. "You went," he said, not looking at her. "Yes," Jane replied. "She talked to you?" Jane nodded. "Briefly. She said she didn't know what this was yet, but she asked me to come hear her speak today. She's doing a talk at the youth center." Doug set his mug down harder than necessary. "And you think this is a good idea?" "I don't know what it is, Doug. I'm just trying not to run from it anymore." He rubbed his face with both hands. "This isn't just about you. What happens when this goes public? When our family gets dragged into it?" "She already is public, Doug." "That ship has sailed. You know what I mean. This could open everything up. The affair. The adoption. The fact that I, Jane corrected sharply, abandoned her." Doug looked up then, his jaw tense. "You think I haven't carried guilt too?" Jane stood. "If you had, we wouldn't be having this conversation 18 years late." He didn't argue. He didn't have to. The drive to the youth center was quiet. Jane wore a simple cardigan and jeans, nothing to draw attention. She parked on a side street, heart hammering, unsure of whether she'd be welcome. The youth center was a modern building nestled between two old warehouses, the kind of community space that held as much struggle as it did hope. Inside, folding chairs were arranged in rows, facing a modest stage. Posters for Voices of Tomorrow lined the walls. The audience was mostly teenagers, some disinterested, some curious, and a scattering of older adults with notepads. Jane found a seat in the back corner. The room buzzed. A woman with a headset stepped on stage, gave a short introduction, and then Noelle walked up, her presence commanding. She wore jeans and a grey tee, minimal makeup, and her natural curls pulled into a low bun. Still, every eye followed her. "My name is Noelle Harmon," she began. "I'm a photojournalist, a storyteller, and once I was a number in a foster system. Today, I want to talk about identity, how we build it, how it's stolen, and how sometimes we have to go digging for it in places we were told to forget." Jane's chest tightened. Noelle's voice was calm, confident, but underneath it, Jane recognized something else. A wound. Not open, but still red at the edges. "I was adopted at 3, Noelle continued. "Before that, I was passed from home to home. Some kind, some not. What I knew early was that I didn't look like my parents. They were white. I was not, and nobody offered answers." A quiet ripple moved through the room. "I didn't know who I was," she said, "until one day, someone put a camera in my hand, and the world started making sense through a lens." She talked about her journey, photographing resilience, exploring foster care reform, visiting birth family reunions across the country. Every word drew Jane in, but it was what came next that made her breath hitch. "2 nights ago," Noelle said slowly, "I met someone I've been searching for most of my life. My birth mother." Gasps scattered through the audience. "She didn't come to find me. I found her. She watched from a distance like I was a stranger in a zoo. And the truth is, I wanted to hate her. I still don't know if I don't." Silence. Heavy. "But I realized something," Noelle said, scanning the room. "Hating her doesn't fill the gap. It doesn't give me what I lost. It only keeps the wound bleeding." Jane blinked back tears. "So I asked her to come today, because this story isn't just mine. It belongs to every kid who ever wondered why they weren't enough, and every parent who ever let silence speak for them." Heads turned. The spotlight wasn't literal, but suddenly All eyes landed on Jane. Noelle looked directly at her. "Mom, would you stand?" Jane froze. The air in the room thinned. Doug had warned her. Betty had warned her, even Haley, but none of it mattered. Because Noelle had called her Mom. Jane stood slowly, hands shaking. "Tell them," Noelle said, voice even. "Tell them why." The room held its breath. Jane's voice cracked at first, then steadied. "Because I was weak. Because I was scared. Because the man I loved gave me an ultimatum, and I told myself it was the only choice. But the truth is, it wasn't. I made a decision that ruined 3 lives. Yours, mine, and his. And I've regretted it every day since." A teen in the front row whispered, "Damn," just loud enough for the room to hear. Jane continued, "I was so focused on appearances, on staying the perfect wife, the good mother to the children I already had, that I forgot to be human, and I didn't think anyone would ever forgive me, least of all you." She looked at Noelle. "I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking for the chance to learn how to do better." Noelle didn't respond immediately. Then she stepped forward, took the mic, and looked out at the crowd. "This is what reconciliation looks like," she said. "Messy, unscripted. Painful, but maybe necessary." Applause. Not thunderous, but real. After the event, people lined up to talk to Noelle. Jane stayed in her corner, unsure if she should wait. Then Betty appeared at her side. "You were brave," she said. "I was shaking," Jane admitted. "Bravery's not about still hands," Betty replied. "It's about showing up anyway." Then Haley approached, her eyes misty. "You did good, Mom." "She called me Mom," Jane whispered. "I heard," Haley said. That was the real standing ovation. As they stepped into the Portland rain together, Jane didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But today, she had stood. And that mattered. The evening after the youth center event, Jane sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the envelope Noelle had slipped into her hand just before they parted. It was small and unassuming, her name written in strong black ink across the front. Her fingers trembled as she slid it open. Inside was a single photograph. Noelle as a child, maybe 4 or 5, standing in front of a dilapidated brownstone. Her smile was soft, uncertain, and her small hand clutched the edge of a tattered backpack. On the back, in Noelle's handwriting, were 4 words. "This is where I started." Jane pressed the photo to her chest. The weight of what Noelle had lived through felt suffocating. The comfortable silence of her own home now felt like a betrayal. Doug knocked and entered cautiously. "Everything okay?" "She gave me this," Jane said, holding up the picture. Doug sat across from her, the tension in his shoulders visible. "She's trying, Jane." "That's more than I thought we'd ever get." Jane nodded. "But I keep thinking, how much pain she had to carry alone. While we moved on." Doug didn't speak right away. "I never moved on," he said finally. "I just got good at pretending." Jane looked at him, really looked, for the first time in years, perhaps. The guilt etched into the lines on his face, the fatigue behind his eyes. "Why didn't we ever talk about her?" "Because we didn't know how," he admitted. "Because every time I thought about her, I saw the worst version of myself. And I was afraid if I said her name out loud, you'd remember who helped make that choice." Jane lowered her gaze. "It wasn't just you. But I gave the ultimatum," he said. "And I never once gave you a chance to fight it. I wanted control." Not family. They sat in silence for several minutes, the photo resting between them like an artifact of all their failures. The next morning, Jane found herself outside of a small cafe in northeast Portland, the address scrawled at the bottom of a text from Noelle. Saturday, 9 a.m. I'll bring the records. When Noelle arrived, she wasn't alone. A tall man in his early 50s walked beside her, grey dusting his tight curls, a worn satchel slung over one shoulder. His posture was guarded but not hostile. Noelle introduced him simply. "This is Marcus. He was one of the few foster parents I stayed with who actually gave a damn." Jane stood awkwardly. "Thank you for taking care of her." Marcus nodded. "She didn't need much, just someone who didn't treat her like a broken part." They sat together in a quiet corner booth. Noelle pulled out a thin manila folder and laid it on the table. "These are the agency records," she said. "I had to request them 3 times. Even with my platform, it was like pulling teeth." Jane opened the folder, her breath catching. There were familiar documents: her signed relinquishment, the social worker's report, Noelle's birth certificate. But then a page Jane had never seen before. A note attached 6 weeks after Noelle's birth, labeled Retraction Inquiry. In shaky handwriting it stated, "I changed my mind. I want my daughter back. Please advise." Jane stared at it. "That's not mine," she said, voice hollow. "I never wrote this." Noelle watched her carefully. "I didn't think it was. The handwriting doesn't match the other documents." Marcus leaned in. "We think someone else tried to get you back, Jane. Doug." "Rick?" Her mind reeled. "Do you know who might have done this?" Noelle asked. Jane shook her head slowly. "The only person who wanted to keep you was Rick, but I told him not to come back. I shut the door." "What happened to him?" Noelle's voice was tight. "I don't know," Jane said. "We never spoke again after the day I told him I was pregnant. He offered to help and I told him it was over, that I was staying with my husband." Noelle's jaw clenched. "So he could have tried." Jane swallowed hard. "Maybe. But if he did, he never told me." There was another silence, one layered with grief and questions no one had answers for. Then Noelle reached into her satchel and pulled out a second photo. It was Jane, younger, her hair longer and pulled back, holding a camera and laughing. It had been taken during a college photography retreat. "I found this at the agency," Noelle said. "No name, no date, just paperclip to my file." Jane blinked. "I never gave them that." Marcus cleared his throat. "Maybe someone else did." A cold thought crawled up Jane's spine. "What are you saying?" Noelle tapped the photo gently. "Someone didn't want me to forget you. Even if you wanted to forget me." Jane stared at the photo. Somewhere in the agency, someone had left behind a breadcrumb, a reminder. A truth that wanted to be known. "I don't understand," Jane whispered. But Noelle looked at her with something like sympathy. "You weren't the only one who regretted their choice," she said softly. Jane looked between her daughter and the man who had helped raise her when no one else would. Then Noelle spoke again. "I'm planning a follow-up to my exhibition," she said. "A series on truth, on origins. I want to include our story, if you're willing." Jane's stomach flipped. "You want me in it?" "I want the truth," Noelle said. "As raw as it is, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up." Jane nodded slowly. "Then I will." Noelle nodded back. No smile, not yet. But something softer than before passed across her face. After the cafe, Jane walked home in the drizzle, the folder tucked under her arm. Somewhere out there, a man named Rick might still carry his own regret. Somewhere in a storage box, there might be more clues, more answers. But for now, Jane had something she never thought she'd earn. A second beginning. And this time, she wouldn't run from it. Jane stood on the balcony of her bedroom, the soft rustle of the wind brushing through the autumn trees below. In her hand was the same old photograph Noelle had given her, the one taken from the adoption agency, the one Jane never remembered giving them. She kept staring at it, not just because of the photo itself, but because of what it meant. If she hadn't given it, who had? Her mind spiraled. Rick. Could he have taken that photo, submitted it behind her back, or had someone at the agency done it? Someone who knew what they were about to erase and quietly left a piece of truth in the file. Before she could get too deep in her thoughts, the door creaked open. Doug stepped in. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "You okay?" he asked cautiously. Jane didn't look at him. "She's putting us in her exhibition." "A new one, about truth." Doug leaned against the doorframe, silent. "I said yes," Jane added, finally turning to face him. "She said I don't have to be perfect, just honest." Doug nodded slowly. "That's more grace than we deserve." Jane crossed her arms, her tone turning sharper. "Did you know anything about that picture in her file?" He looked genuinely confused. "What picture?" She held it up to him. He blinked. "That's you. Where was that taken?" "College trip. My roommate took it." "I never gave it to anyone. And yet it ended up in her file at the agency." Doug stepped forward slowly, examining it. "You're saying Rick might have submitted it?" "I'm saying I don't know." "But someone wanted her to remember me." Doug sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped between his knees. "Jane, I lied to you again." She froze. "I told you I tried to get her back after you signed the papers," he began. "That much was true. But I didn't tell you I found Rick, that I spoke to him." Jane's chest tightened. "You what?" "It was a few months after the adoption was finalized. I hired a guy, the same one who found the photo. He tracked Rick down in DC. He was working for some non-profit, urban housing advocacy or something like that." Jane sank onto the bench across from him. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was ashamed. Because I thought maybe if he was still in the picture, it was his responsibility." "Not mine. I figured if he cared enough, he'd find her, raise her." "I didn't have the courage to do it myself." Jane was speechless. Doug looked up at her, eyes bloodshot. "He said he'd tried." "He had gone to the agency, just like I had. But they stonewalled him, told him she was already placed." "He said he even wrote letters, but then he stopped, said it felt like trying to shout through concrete." Jane's voice was barely a whisper. "Is he still alive?" "I don't know," Doug admitted. "We didn't keep in touch, but I never forgot what he said to me before we hung up." "What?" "He said, 'You can bury the truth all you want, but one day she's going to dig it up. And I hope, for her sake, you're man enough to face it when she does.'" Jane felt a chill run down her spine. "You knew all of this, and you still let me carry the guilt alone," she said, her voice shaking. Doug nodded, shame coating every word. "Because I didn't want to be the villain in your story, but I was." "I am." Jane looked at him, eyes filled with years of pain and revelation. "You kept us both from knowing our daughter, and you kept me from knowing the man who tried to fight for her." "I know," he said quietly. There was a knock at the door downstairs. They both startled. Jane stood slowly. "That's Noelle." She walked to the door, her steps careful but firm. Noelle stood on the porch, her camera slung over one shoulder, a manila folder in hand, and her expression unreadable. "I found something," she said simply, holding out the folder. I thought you should see it before I publish anything. Jane stepped aside. Come in. They sat around the kitchen island, the air thick with expectation. Noelle opened the folder and slid out a copy of a letter. Jane picked it up. It was dated 6 weeks after Noelle's birth, addressed to the adoption agency. In Rick's handwriting. To whom it may concern, I am the biological father of the child born to Jane Macmillan on March the 4th. I was not listed on the birth certificate, but I have been made aware of the adoption. I would like to request reconsideration of custody. I am willing to provide a stable home and am prepared to go through any necessary legal process. I ask only that you consider the child's right to know where she came from. Jane felt her eyes blur with tears. He tried, she whispered. He tried everything. Noelle leaned back, watching her. I had to sue the agency for those records. They buried this, Jane. They never told me he existed. They never told me he fought for me. Jane looked up. I didn't know, I swear. I thought he walked away. He didn't, Noelle said. He was pushed out. Doug entered the room quietly and sat at the edge of the counter. I'm sorry, he said. I knew he went to the agency. I knew he tried, and I still told Jane it was final. I didn't think I could face what it meant if he'd succeeded. Noelle stared at him for a long moment, then turned back to Jane. I'm still doing the exhibition, she said, and now I'm thinking of titling it Erased Lines, because that's what they tried to do. Erase everything. Jane nodded, her throat tight. Whatever you need, I'll be there. Noelle stood, her voice quieter now. I want to meet my father, if he's still out there. Jane stood too. Then I'll help you find him. Noelle gave a single nod. Good. I'll let you know what I find. She walked to the door but paused just before opening it. I used to think I was unwanted, she said without looking back. Now I realize I was never given the chance to be found. Then she left. Jane stood frozen in the silence. Doug spoke first. She's stronger than either of us ever were. Jane turned to him. And we better become worthy of even being part of her story. He nodded, and for the first time in 2 decades, they both knew they couldn't rewrite the past. But maybe, just maybe, they could stop hiding from it. The air inside the hotel lobby felt colder than usual as Jane sat curled into a corner armchair, her coat still buttoned tight, though she hadn't stepped outside in over an hour. Her hands clutched a printout Noelle had emailed her just hours before. It was a scanned obituary dated 3 years ago. Rick Devo, 49, of Washington, D.C., passed away peacefully after a brief illness, survived by no immediate family. Memorial services held at New Life Community Chapel. That was it. No elaborate tribute. No photos, no list of survivors. Jane stared at the words until they blurred. He had died alone, and worse, Noelle had never gotten to meet him. A hollow ache settled in her chest, heavy and shameful. She remembered Rick's laugh, the quiet intellect behind his eyes, the way he always listened without rushing to fill the silence. And now, any opportunity to reconnect, to apologize, to fill in the lost years, had evaporated with a few lines in a forgotten newspaper. Her phone buzzed. A text from Darlene. Heard from Noelle yet? Jane replied. She's in Portland. Wants to see the gallery. Alone, but she said she'd talk afterward. Another buzz. Kevin this time. Let us know if she changes her mind. I still want to meet her, even if it's just once. She smiled faintly, grateful that her children, her other children, had grown into people far braver than she had been. The front desk phone rang and startled her. Moments later, a hotel staffer approached. Ms. Macmillan, there's a young woman in the restaurant asking for you. She said to tell you, bring the photo. Jane stood, heart pounding, the printed obituary and old photo tucked under her arm like precious artifacts. She walked briskly through the lobby, past murmuring diners and clinking silverware, until she spotted Noelle seated at a window booth, nursing a glass of iced tea. Noelle looked up but didn't smile. Sit. Jane obeyed. I found the cemetery, Noelle began without preamble. Rick's buried in a public lot, unmarked. No headstone. Just a plot number on a city record. Jane swallowed. I'm so sorry, Noelle. I'm not telling you for sympathy, she said, voice level. I'm telling you because I'm tired of chasing ghosts. If I'm going to know where I come from, I need to know the whole thing, the ugly parts too. Jane pulled the photograph from her coat and laid it gently on the table. It was the only picture she had of Rick, snapped during a company retreat. He stood near a lake, sleeves rolled up, the wind catching his collar. There was sunlight in his smile. Noelle picked it up carefully. Her expression softened. He looked kind, she said. He was, Jane replied. I didn't deserve his kindness. Noelle nodded. That's the part I'm starting to understand. People keep talking about what I deserved or didn't. But it's not really about that, is it? It's about the choices people make when they're afraid. Jane's throat tightened. I was terrified. Of what people would say, of what my husband would do, of losing the life I'd built. I made every decision from a place of fear, and I lost you because of it. There was a long silence. Noelle broke it. I'm adding a final piece to the exhibit. A photo I took last week. It's of his grave, or where it should be. Jane blinked. You went there? Noelle nodded. I left a stone with his name on it, something to mark that someone came. That someone remembered. Jane reached across the table, hand trembling, and placed it over Noelle's. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. Noelle didn't pull away. I think it's time the world hears the real story, she said quietly, not the version tied up in shame or secrecy. The truth. About what happened, about who I am, about who he was. Jane took a breath. Then tell it. I'll stand beside you. You will? I have to, she said. It's the only way forward. A server approached, and they both fell silent as he poured water and cleared empty plates. When he left, Noelle finally smiled, just slightly. I'm going to dedicate the exhibition to Rick, she said, and to you. Jane's eyes welled. I don't deserve that. It's not about deserve, Noelle said. It's about telling the truth, even when it hurts. Jane nodded slowly. And what happens after the truth is out? Noelle leaned back. Then we see who has the courage to stay. Jane blinked back tears. I'm not going anywhere this time, she whispered. Noelle didn't answer. But she didn't move her hand either. Outside, the sun had begun to set. Shadows lengthened across the pavement, as if the world itself was preparing to turn a page. Jane didn't know what tomorrow held, whether Noelle would ever call her Mom, or if they would ever be more than this fragile beginning. But sitting there, hand in hand with the daughter she had once let go, she finally felt something like redemption flicker at the edge of her grief. The story wasn't finished, not yet. The night of the exhibition opening in Portland came with rain, soft, cold, persistent. The Mercer Gallery glowed against the grey drizzle, its windows alive with warm light and silhouettes of people milling beneath framed images. Jane stood outside under a shared umbrella with Kevin and Darlene. Her hands were cold, despite her gloves, her stomach tight with anticipation. You don't have to do this if you're not ready, Darlene said gently. I do, Jane replied. Not just for me. For all of us. They entered together, shoulders squared. Inside, the gallery buzzed with hushed voices, the soft click of camera shutters, and the rustling of programs. Noelle's photographs lined the walls, each one raw, intimate, and haunting. Her work had evolved, more layered now, less about presentation and more about truth. People moved slowly from frame to frame, reading captions, wiping away tears, exchanging glances. Jane spotted familiar pieces, the hospital bassinet, the series of foster homes, but also new ones. One showed a young woman standing at the base of a tree with bare branches, looking skyward. Another showed a folded letter beside a cup of coffee captioned, "Regret, steeped too long." At the far end of the room was the photograph Jane hadn't known would be there. It was a black and white portrait, Noelle seated on a worn wooden bench, Jane beside her. Both faced forward. Their expressions were somber but clear, eyes locked on the lens. There was no pretense, no attempt at false resolution. Just a quiet, mutual willingness to be seen. The caption read, "Unspoken, then spoken." Jane's breath caught. She wanted the photo to be real, a soft voice said beside her. Jane turned and found Betty Harmon, Noelle's adoptive mother, smiling gently. "She told me, if people are going to see the wound, they might as well see the scar too." Jane's eyes filled. "She's remarkable." "You raised someone extraordinary." Betty shook her head. "She was already extraordinary. We just made sure she had the space to discover it." They stood quietly for a moment. Then Betty reached into her purse and pulled out a folded card. "She wanted you to have this, but she didn't want to give it to you in front of everyone." Jane accepted the card with trembling fingers. On the front was a photograph of Noelle as a child, maybe 6 or 7, smiling with 2 missing teeth. The inside was handwritten. "I can't rewrite the beginning, neither can you, but maybe we get to write this chapter together." "One page at a time, Noelle." Jane pressed the card to her chest. She had no words. Across the room, Noelle appeared. She wasn't alone. Darlene was at her side, talking animatedly, their gestures mirroring like long-lost sisters catching up on too many years. Kevin joined a moment later, extending a hand, and Noelle took it, smiling. Jane didn't approach them. She watched from afar as her children, 3 of them now, stood together in a way that felt unthinkable just months before. Doug entered the gallery a few minutes later, quietly, head down, still unsure of his place. He lingered near the back wall, absorbing every image like a man searching for pieces of himself in each frame. Later, when the gallery began to empty and guests filtered out into the Portland drizzle, Noelle approached Jane near the exit. "Nice coat," she said. "You always dress like someone from an old New England catalogue." Jane laughed, caught off guard. "Guilty." Noelle reached for Jane's gloved hand and squeezed it briefly. "I'm not ready to call you Mom," she said. Jane nodded. "I wouldn't expect that. But I'm willing to see what else you might be." Jane swallowed hard, emotion rising like a tide. "Thank you. That's more than I could have hoped for." Noelle looked past her, toward the emptying gallery. "I'm doing a panel at the university next month. On truth and reconciliation in art. Think you'd want to be on it?" Jane blinked. "Me?" "Yeah," Noelle said. "Real stories, real consequences, real attempts to make things right." "That's what the students need to hear, not just pretty resolutions." Jane hesitated. "I wouldn't know what to say." Noelle smirked. "Start with the truth. You're getting better at it." Jane smiled. "Then yes." "I'd be honored." They stood under the overhang as rain drummed against the concrete. Kevin jogged up, his jacket damp, cheeks flushed. "Noelle says we're grabbing late-night ramen," he said. You coming? Jane looked to her daughter. Noelle shrugged. It's not family dinner. It's noodles, with people I might like. Jane grinned, heart fluttering. Then yes. I'm in. As they stepped out into the rain, a car drove by with a giant LED screen on the side, advertising the exhibition. Noelle's face lit up on the panel, confident, calm, seen. A group of teenagers pointed and shouted.
That's her! That's the artist from TikTok! She's amazing!
Noelle rolled her eyes, laughing. Apparently, I'm every newsstand famous now. Jane laughed too, but her chest ached with gratitude. Once, she had disowned her daughter out of fear. Tonight, that same daughter had welcomed her, not with open arms, not with instant forgiveness, but with space. And that, Jane realized, was its own kind of grace. They crossed the street together, Jane, Noelle, Kevin, Darlene, a family reshaped not by perfection, but by truth, time, and choice. If you're still with us, thank you. This story wasn't about fairy tale endings. It was about facing what hurts, owning what we've done, and finding the courage to write a new page. If you believe healing is possible, even after the unthinkable, then share this story. Leave a comment below. Subscribe to the channel. And remember, even when we're broken, we can still choose to begin again. See you in the next story.